Hi everyone. Welcome to Project Violet. So this is a project that's been kind of in the works for a little while, as part of Level Up, and it's like kind of a bit of a training exercise at the studio as well. It's been a kind of a big collaboration with Side Effects as well. So before we even start, I want to say a big thank you to Side Effects and the team there and Chris for allowing us to bring us into this a super exciting time for Houdini as well. This feels like a kind of a big change and a real exciting point. The goal of the project was to produce a small teaser that kind of followed our style of some of our cinematics, but allowed us to test and work in some of the newer features of Houdini. So for this topic, we're talking about the rig and Ragdoll. We talked last week a bit about some of the Copernicus stuff. We've got Nico talking about the animation later. But we wanted to be able to use it as a way to kind of like bring more of our pipeline across into Houdini, because we're pretty Houdini-centric already, but we have some of the more traditional workflows in the animation and rigging area at the moment, but we wanted to see how far we could go with this. So just to kind of give a bit of an overview of the structure of the presentation, I'll do a little bit about who I am, what I do, and where I kind of sit at the studio and how I got there, and then about who Realtime are in general, because like we've been around for a while, but not people often haven't heard of us. For a long time, we were just in this studio in the middle of nowhere, so people kind of saw our work but didn't know who did it. And then I'll show the final piece for the first time, our little short teaser, and then do a little bit of an overview of Apex. And what's cool about this event is that you're going to hear about Apex from lots of different people, and they're all going to be describing the same thing in very kind of like different ways, which I think is going to be cool because everyone's going to have their own little spin on how it works in their brain, how it clicks for them. So if mine doesn't work, I'm sure someone else's will, or maybe mine works and theirs won't. So I think that's really cool. So so I'll do a little overview of that and then talk about why Apex is cool, why it's not scary for animators, even though when you look at the initial rig, it can look a bit intimidating. And then I'll go through the things like the skeleton, how we set that up, the skinning, the guides, then the tagging process, the packing that up, and then the actual Apex bit, and the logic and components, auto components versus custom components, and then how we just exported that out. So the giant picture of me, which is always the worst part of these things. I hate seeing a giant picture of my face, so I'll try not to look at it. But so I'm Sam Taylor. I'm the head of innovation and development at Realtime. So I'm in charge of kind of looking at future tech and workflows and bringing those into the studio, and kind of keeping our pipeline moving forward and trying to make it as efficient as possible where it makes sense to. But another part of my role is working on internal staff training and development, and also running our junior Level Up program, which I'll talk a little bit about later on. But I started in the industry just over a decade ago, and I actually started off originally as like a technical generalist with a leaning towards rigging in Maya. So it's really interesting to be kind of coming back to rigging at this point, because I kind of moved away from rigging at one point, and now I've kind of gone full circle and looking at it again. Back then I joined Realtime actually as more of an FX artist at that point. I'd like an FX generalist. And then fast forward a few years, I got into teaching, and I joined a predominantly Maya-centric course, but to then bring Houdini to that course and teach more of the technical content. And then I freelanced all the time whilst I was teaching on various films, TV shows, and some very strange projects at the same time. And then I became more of a Houdini generalist at that point, dealing with a lot more SOP process, making tools instead of just effects. And again, a few years down the line for that, I went back to Realtime to kind of head up their training and development and start that junior program. That's a bit about me. So I'll move on to Realtime in general. So this is where I'm at the moment. So we have been around for about 30 years. We started out, again, in the middle of nowhere. We were predominantly in architectural visualization and automotive at that point, which we do still do that, but in a very different way to what we used to. But a few years into our kind of, as we start to grow, we got most well known for our game cinematics more than anything else. And then more recently, we've gone into film and episodic. But our team kind of split into two core pipelines. We've got our in-engine work for some of our game cinematics, and our automotive is entirely in-engine, and our pre-rendered work is all in Houdini. We've got two locations in the UK, one in Manchester and one in rural Lancashire. I won't tell you the exact place of it because you'll have never heard of it. But we mostly operate on a full remote or hybrid basis, so we kind of like to give the flexibility to our team. But I'll just play a quick showreel of some of our most recent work. Thank you very much. I definitely did not do all of that stuff. That is a huge. We've got a team of like about 100 people, and we kind of scale up and down from around that. So yeah, amazing people at the studio. But hopefully that gives you kind of an idea of the breadth of kind of what we do. We've got super stylized stuff in there. We've got some photoreal stuff. We've got, as I say, in-engine, pre-rendered. And yeah, one of the things our automotive team do is they do configurable cinematics, which is basically where you can see how cool the car looks and switch it at the same time, rather than just having like a turntable like you often see elsewhere. But yeah, so that's us, that's what we do, and that's who I am. Now the moment we've been waiting for is the first showing of Project Violet. I'll show it again at the end of the presentation as well, so it stuttered a little bit there, so hopefully we'll get to see it without it stuttering. But yeah, so as mentioned before, it was a way of us trying to bring in more of the character rigging and animation that we've done elsewhere in our pipeline into Houdini and see how far we can get it and try and produce something that we normally work with, just all in Houdini and keeping it kind of more contained in one place. So yeah, the project was an entirely USD project too, so we used our kind of typical pipeline for that, but kind of started bolting the animation stuff in as well, which meant we had to adapt a little bit in the way we publish things. But we used a bunch of extra stuff as well. So we used, say, Copernicus for the roads. We actually used some of the old Titan tools from a previous side effects project to help build some of the procedural tiling of the building. We did all the groom and CFX in Houdini, and obviously the rig and animation in Houdini as well, and lighting and rendering was all Karma, Solaris. So yeah, so here's a closer look at Violet. So you can see her iridescent coat, which is one of my favorite things about her. And she's not it's not as gloomy and misty here, so you can actually get a proper look at her. So Apex, what is it? Why is it cool? Apex means it's an all-person execution. And it's essentially the logic behind building rigs. It's not the rig itself, which is the thing that I think when I first started learning about it, I was like, I don't quite understand what it is, and it seems more complicated, but it's not. But it's Houdini's new modular-based framework that came out around Houdini 20. And it seems as if it's going to keep growing and evolving and taking over other areas of Houdini as well, which is like super exciting. But it addresses bottlenecks with the traditional SOP-based evaluation workflows and tries to streamline some of that. But again, it exists in every context, but for this presentation, we used it in rigging. But the way I like to kind of think about it as well is it doesn't work the same, but you can think about it in a similar way to TOPS and PDG, where it's kind of the delayed evaluation. You're kind of defining the processes and then executing it later, which is, again, a cool way of doing it. You're building the rules and then processing it. And it's flexible. It's entirely kind of stored as geometry behind the scenes as well, which Houdini's great at, dealing with large amounts of geometry and points and primitives. So at the end of the day, it just kind of all packs down to that. And then you can interact with it with Python, Apex script, which is like Python, just it deals with variables in a slightly different way. So one of the things I think is pretty unique about Apex as well, and the person who built most of the rig for this, so I was kind of like more the CG supervisor on this project and kind of technical support in a few different areas. We had a guy called Abe, who I'll mention at the end as well, who built most of this. He's a Houdini artist, a Houdini technical artist, but he'd never done rigging before. And I thought that was a unique opportunity to try and put someone who didn't know rigging into a rigging pipeline, who didn't kind of have that pre-understanding of what a rig should be. And I thought that was a kind of a unique take on it. But it also illustrates that you can have different levels of rig experience to engage with this type of rigging workflow. So, like, if you're super like pro rigger, you can dive very, very deep into the Apex graph and design your own rig components very easily, and I'm sure we'll see some of that today. Or you can engage mostly with the auto rig components and get very, very far with that. So I think when you see some of the other talks today, you'll see that there's, I think ours is like predominantly auto rig components, and other people have gone further in. So we only kind of started modifying as we felt we hit those kind of walls and we needed to kind of go a bit deeper with it. But yeah, so I think it's really unique in the fact that it can offer different entry points for different types of people depending on how complex you want to go. The other thing is it's very fast now as well. Because of its kind of delayed and partial evaluation, it means we can get pretty fast, is that playing? Yes. Pretty fast response times in the viewport as well. So it's only executing once, as I say, at the end, and then it's only going to evaluate the parts that it's using, and it's going to, again, it's got multi-threading in mind, so it's going to do that. So it means when our animators engaging with it, they're going to get near real-time speeds in the viewport. Again, this is an optimized version of the rig. We haven't got any of the environments in there. We're getting around 30 frames a second, which is great. It means an animator can get a very good idea of what they're doing without having to flipbook or like create any kind of play blasts and stuff, which is super cool. And also, it means we can start doing other things that Houdini's good at, like dealing with dynamics. And it's always fun to have ragdoll physics. The second you have a ragdoll, the first thing you want to do is throw it. So we did. And it looks like she's had a few too many there. And then I've included this one as well to kind of highlight. Hopefully, if any of you have seen the old, like one of the hives from last year, I think it might have been the 20.5 one, there was a version of Electra where she's kind of getting held up by a different Electra and then kind of thrown off to the side. And I kind of wanted to show that, like, when you see those demos, sometimes you can go, it's like such an ideal scenario. It must be really difficult to do, but this is a completely custom rig, a completely new character, and it was super easy to do exactly the same thing that was in that demo. But obviously, yeah, ragdolls doing funny, weird stuff aside, like, why is that useful as well? It means that our animators can essentially animate as they would expect to, and then have the physics take place and like react to things as you would expect. So if you think of the thumbnail we had at the start, where she's leaning on that desk, all an animator needs to do is kind of roughly animate it into place, have it intersect, and then we can activate the ragdoll, set up all the physics and constraints so that it does only the bits moves that we need to set moving. That was terrible English. I'm the English one here, and I'm the one that's speaking with the worst English. Constrain the parts that we want to keep still and have the bits active that need to move. So yeah, it just means that we're going to get like a more natural reaction without having to kind of counter animate to kind of build those collisions artificially. And also, I've done a lot of CFX in my time. Having things handle their own collisions is brilliant because it means that when an animator makes things intersect themselves, you don't have to keep going back and forth to get what you need out of them. So the actual rig itself, so this is the graph. It looks quite intense, but I've broken it down into sections based on what they're actually doing. So the first bit is just obviously importing geo, doing any kind of initial processing, and then we've got the skeleton creation, then the skinning. So we built the skeleton procedurally from the mesh here. You don't have to do that. You can, if you've got a pre-built skeleton or you've one that you've downloaded, you can build all of this using that as well. So those first 3 bits that's probably one of the biggest parts of the graph. They can get thrown away if you already have something that exists. And then we have the actual building of the controls. Again, if you've got a set of controls that you want to use, you can just import those. And then we pack everything down, which is essentially just literally creating some endpoints. And the actual rigged logic is just this blue bit at the bottom here. So it's actually pretty small when you're not building the skeleton from scratch. So yeah, super, super manageable. So starting off with, actually, for that, how intense that was, I don't want animators to see that and go, it's terrifying. Like, animators have got a much cleaner way of interacting with it. So the way it all packs down is you can just save it out as a BGO at the end, which you'll see later, and then bring that back in, and then the animator gets a very kind of clean, intuitive interface with the animator, the Apex scene animate node. And all they then do is interact with the rig. So we've got a few extra things going on here as well. So again, this is just for how we were interacting with it. You don't necessarily need all these as well. So we have like the rig coming in, a subnetwork which is assigning materials so the animator can see them if they want to see like eyebrows or pupils and stuff like that for aiming the face. And then we've got a Python node which is rebringing in the rig components. And then we add it to the scene, we add a prop to that scene as well, and then the animator can add it. If there's no props, you don't need to add that as well. This whole thing can be really small, it can literally be one node. And what's awesome as well with Houdini is you can, if you have like a preset way of engaging with these things, you can build it into a recipe per show or something like that. And then you just load that recipe for bringing in Violet, and the animator doesn't need to do anything other than load that recipe. So then we build the skeleton itself. So as I say, this was built procedurally. We essentially used typical SOP-based workflows to select loops, turn them into points, and as you'll hear many times during today, a point can just be a joint. It just needs a few extra attributes to do that, which is what we did. And if you've got a consistent character model that you're going to use moving forward, you can essentially build a rig from that same character every time. So you have a rig that adapts to the character that you're using each time as well, which is super, super cool. And again, we kept the same model throughout this project as well, which meant that anytime we kind of resculpted anything, all the kind of point order was the same. We could just load that back in, our rig would adjust to match that, which was super, super cool. The skinning, again, like I'll briefly go over some of this. So we used a linear skinning capture to define like each of the points along it. And then we did a duplicate of that to allow us to move points into areas like the clavicle and the hips to kind of keep some of that volume loss. And then we used a TET embed to convert the character mesh into a volumetric tetrahedron version of the skin to get kind of better skin weights. And then we did a loop over the fingers to give ourselves a higher res version of that as well. And then we used a bone capture biharmonic to assign the weights, the weighting attributes to give us, as a better skin weights on that. Whilst we were researching this process, we came across Eugene Flormata, I don't know if I've pronounced that correctly, who did a great video about this workflow. So if you are looking to do something similar, check that out. But at the end of the day, this is, again, all SOP processes. So if you're comfortable with that side of Houdini, and you've got tricks for kind of spreading attributes, blurring attributes, this can all happen here. But this was just a workflow to try and get as much of the skinning done procedurally as possible. But again, at the very end, we still had to do a bit of manual skinning, because if you want the perfect skin weights, you're still going to got to do a bit of that. But what this allowed us to do is kind of get something that worked almost 80% of the way there, so we could start passing that on to our animators to begin their animation. Okay, so the guide skeleton. So this works on top of the skeleton itself. This is kind of like the control rig that I'm then going to use to move our actual rig skeleton itself. And I'm trying, when I kind of like process this initially, I kind of had to think back to how I've been used to dealing with rigs in the past. And when you kind of like, if you were rigging something like Maya in the past, you often have like a skin rig, and then you've got like your IK bone joints, you've got your FK bone joints, and then they're all kind of driving the skin skeleton. It's kind of like a similar concept to that, but you can add like extra things onto that, on top of that. So in this example here, we're actually taking the eye joints, moving them out using a rig attribute VOP, and then putting a point between them that kind of like halves the transform on them. And then we're going to use this for a look at later on in the process. And similarly, we did the same for the cheeks. We took just a point on the cheek, and again, a point is just a joint in KineFX when it's got the right attributes. And then we mirrored the transform matrix on it, so that if we wanted to use this to control a blend shape for like buffing out the cheeks or pushing them in, we can just grab them both and pull one out, and it will do the mirrored version on the other side, so you get this kind of nice reaction. And then the actual tagging itself. So this is a fundamental step in the process to allow for like modular rigging based on these tags. And what's cool is you can have, it's a similar kind of thought process to kind of grouping elements of your rig to assign logic to that part. But what's cool about this is that you can have multiple tags for each one, and you can then reuse rig logic with like components. So say you're doing something like an FK leg on a biped, and you design some sort of custom rig component that uses the leg tag. You could then plug in a horse that has that leg tag, a spider, and then that component will just work exactly the same across those things, which is super cool. So on this bit here, the blue bit is actually the only bit that is doing that tag. The yellow bit is basically assigning limits to each of these areas, so that when it comes through to the animator, they'll only ever see the control for like rotation if it's a rotation control, and so on and so forth. And then the green bit is just us coloring it to make it clear in the viewport what we're looking at. And again, this kind of procedural rig workflow is what makes this really powerful, because you only need to make your rig logic once. So you're like the logic that with Houdini, you're building tools, not building the actual thing, which I think is such a great way of thinking. And once you kind of, I don't know if we've got newer people to Houdini here, like once you kind of have that click, like the world's your oyster, you're building plugins within the software, which is like someone mentioned the other day about like, what plugins does Houdini have? And they were like, you are the plugin, you're making the plugin for yourself. And I think that's such a cool way of thinking it. And this is just kind of, you're building the rig plugin for yourself here, which is awesome. But yeah, this kind of tagging workflow and the neatness like associated with it should be pretty familiar to riggers anyway, because it's just like having a decent naming convention that you can then wildcard in something like Maya. So it shouldn't feel too alien. And then the packing area as well. So this is just kind of like packing everything under its own extension, under the extension that the rig components expect to use during the logic. So the skeleton is a .scale, blend shapes and the deformable objects is .shape, and then the rig as well. And then we pack the custom controllers using merge packed, and then name them. And these can literally be anything. And when I say anything, I mean anything. So when Abe was putting together the drone rig, he started to kind of like concept what he wanted it to look like. And I said, like, I needed this extra thing on the side so that we can like control the tilt of the rotors. So I sent, and he was like, do you mean something like this? And I was like, yeah, but I want it to be exactly as wobbly as that, sarcastically, obviously. And then he sent me back this, going, is this what you mean? And I was like, yeah, that'll do. And now we have wobbly controls on the rig. So yeah, Nico can enjoy that. Yeah, and then you get to the actual rig logic itself. And if you've done everything right, all you're doing is daisy chaining the rig logic kind of components together to describe the functionality of your rig. and then using your tags to assign it to the relevant areas. I realize I didn't play my video straight away, but this is ultimately what's happened. So you can see here, as we kind of click through, you're seeing the rig kind of build itself on the side. So this is the outcome of it on the left-hand side here. But yeah, I'll skip this because it's just going through lots and lots of each of these one by one. So this is kind of an example of how we modified one of the inbuilt components to make it kind of more usable for what we wanted to do. So ultimately, the goal of this was to control blend shapes with something other than the controller that you get by default. So we're using an example of a sphere here. So we're making a rig out of this by essentially extracting its centroid, and then making a bunch of deformed meshes. So then when we add an FK transform and a bone deform, which is what you always need by default, so the FK transform kind of holds all the joint information that you'd expect, and the bone deform enacts those transformations and deformations onto the mesh. And then we add the blend shape auto component, which gives us these abstract controllers, which are these little dots that are floating around, and you get one of them per blend shape that you load in, which is really cool. But if you've got a character that's got hundreds of blend shapes, you'll have like them going off into the sky, which is not the most kind of usable. But in this example, what we wanted to do is kind of use it for a corrective blend shape type workflow. So we wanted to extract the rotation or like an X form from something else to drive the blend shape score. So here's the component we created at the bottom. So this is the logic, the rules that we designed here. And then at the top is the outcome that it builds for us. So it's essentially taking the X form or the rotation from a different controller or from the controller we're putting in, and plugging that in as 6 possible blend shapes. So we've got the X, Y, Z rotation and the plus and minus of each of those as well. And once this is created, it's really easy to rework this if you want to do it for a transform or something, for like a translation or a scale or something like that as well. But yeah, again, this video, like we go through every single node here, which is again far too much for something like this. And but ultimately, all you're doing is kind of the red nodes at the start and the red nodes at the end is fetching the rig and extracting the character, and then we're updating the character and outputting that at the end. So we're not editing a graph directly, we're just editing the logic that builds the graph. So it's just, throughout this, all it's doing is adding additional nodes, finding ports, and connecting them with each other. And this is us defining those rules. And again, as much as this can seem intense to people that are brand new, and you don't always have to make these rig components. There's a bunch of rig components there, and there's going to be more and more that keep coming out, I imagine, to kind of allow you to do more out of the box. But again, for someone who's got rigging experience, this is super exciting because you're building these tools one time, and then you can use it on all of your rigs in the future. And then this feels like almost like a redundant slide, because it's like, then you just save it as a BGO. And that's it. Everything's in there. Your rig's in there, your model's in there, all the logic's in there. It's just, and then the animator can load that up, and then they just put a scene animate in, or well, they add it to their scene, and they can just animate away. So the Ragdoll, this process again is pretty straightforward. There's a bit of initial setup unless you've got some sort of motion clip that can do this for you. So you can either set up, like you initially need to set up your joint limits, basically how far your wrists, your arms can bend when it's gone all floppy. So for this example, we did it manually, but if you've got a motion clip that can show the extent of each of those movements, then you've got it for free. You can make your own motion clip. And again, if you've got a consistent rig, you can do this once, and then you've got it for everything else as well. Or if you've got something that kind of roughly sets up that, you can use the motion, like some of the KineFX tools to transfer that motion capture across to your current rig to set those limits for you as well. And then you can use the Ragdoll collision shape node to build the Ragdoll itself. By default, it'll try and make a shape for every single joint, which is cool. But if you've got like 50 joints in the face for the lips and the eyes and stuff like that, you don't need a single component, like collision for each one of those things. So you can disable some of them, and make it so that your whole head is just one piece, which is cool. And the process of building this under the hood is kind of using something like a convex decomposition in SOPs, where it's kind of like approximating the size of it and trying to build some convex pieces to represent it. And that is essentially it, ultimately. Obviously, there's a lot more deepness we could go into here, so I've got some homework for you all, some additional resources that you can look at. So Max Rose has got loads of cool content. There's a channel called Brundlethwaite. Again, another one I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing correctly. Matt Estella's got some great resources on there, on his CG Wiki for how to interact with Apex. If you're very new to it, Michael Goldfarb from SideFX did a great series introducing you to kind of the concepts of Apex, which is a must. And then once you've passed that, you can have a look at some of Esther's videos, Esther Trilsch, and William Harley again. And the SideFX content library generally is brilliant for looking through those files and breaking them down. But yeah, so now that you know kind of what went into it, we can watch the video again and see how technically it's come to light. So as I say, I wanted to give a big shout out to Abe Coyne, who's one of our junior technical artists. He joined through our Level Up program and was trained in our team, and yeah, produced almost that entire rig. So an absolute amazing person. But yeah, so he joined through our Level Up program. So if any of you are looking to kind of start out your career, we offer permanent junior positions that start off with a 6-month training period where it's 1 day a week in the office, where it's just dedicated to training with people like myself or different leads from other departments to kind of give you this generalist grounding across our entire pipeline before we kind of like migrate you into your specialism within the studio. So it's just kind of like a way to kind of expose you to a lot of areas, but also kind of like give you that support in the early days when you're not just thrown straight into the deep end. But it allows you to kind of work on production stuff with the guidance that you'll need. And that's it. Any questions? I'm aware I talked very fast through a lot of that, so I'm so sorry. I realized when my mouth started to go very dry that I was like, I think I'm talking fast.
Any questions? Yeah.
Hello, thank
Hello.
you. That was a really wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, how do you go about troubleshooting? Like Apex is still quite new, and when you were developing this approach, what was your main points of contact? Because I'm finding as somebody transitioning from Maya to Houdini as a rigger, I know it's like you kind of get a little bit stuck sometimes in the old ways of thinking. So where do you ask questions, or like who is your sort of go-to?
So side effects are always great, like for that kind of thing. A lot of the time for this, it was very much we just kind of like brute forced it. We just kept trying and trying and trying. But yeah, as I say, like I spoke to Chris a few times, and Chris was trying to link us up with people at side effects like Esther. But as I say, I think as the community grows, there's going to be a lot more people. Like I'm pretty sure Abe wrote to Max as well. So yeah, there's more and more content coming out, and it will seem less intimidating. Again, you can speak to us, and we'll help you as well if we can. And I think I put Abe's email on there as well. Like I'm sure he'll be happy to answer questions as well. He dove a lot deeper into some of these areas and spent some late nights researching. I didn't ask him to do that though, just because I think he just loves it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome.
And if you have access to side effect support, they're incredible and fast.
Yes, definitely.
I was wondering about the cloth and hair. Was that added afterward with the vellum solvers, or was that also built into the Ragdoll setup?
So yeah, that was all vellum afterwards. Yeah.
Okay.
We did actually experiment with the wrinkle component as well, which was really cool initially, but we found that it had a bit of a performance hit at one point. and we wanted it to be really performant for our animators, so we took that out initially. But again, you can add some of those things into the rig as well. I think in an ideal world, we'd probably want to have some way of enabling that later down the line so that we can essentially turn that on once we've kind of got everything set up. And it would work quite well for mid characters and background characters. But yeah, the CFX and hair and clothes was all done afterwards in Vellum.
Yeah.
So the way I understood this is like you're building an auto rigger essentially based on a base mesh. You have that constant edge loops that you can pull to generate a rig dynamically.
Yep, but yes, pretty much, yeah. And that's kind of what the concept of Apex and KineFX is that you can essentially automatically rig. Like if you're procedurally building your skeleton like we did as well, yes, you can procedurally rig it.
So my question is then, like, at what point, or have you encountered anywhere that proceduralism breaks if you try to wrap this base mesh around different body types, where you might need to override certain aspects of it to limit movement because the body can't accommodate that kind of movement? Or how do you approach different body types and proportions compared to that example there?
So, I mean, we didn't test it with anything like more unique than this. I think there might be some other people who will be able to talk about that later on. But I don't see why you couldn't like limit things if you needed to anyway. Again, it's super flexible. A lot of times you don't want to limit things anyway. Like I don't know, like are you a technical guy or an animator? Animators often don't like it when you limit their controls. Is that what you meant? Like limiting stuff so that they can't like?
Not necessarily limiting controls, but more limiting the rig, or like if you suddenly have a larger figure, if the proceduralism accommodates for that as long as the base mesh is consistent, or have you found any point like where it would theoretically break, or you would need to then go in and override certain attributes, like, oh, actually we need to have certain properties that are different? I haven't rigged in a long time, so that might be a bit vague of a request, but so it's more just figuring out the limits of the proceduralism in this use case.
I think if it's dramatically different, there's a good chance you'd have to rework some of it. But again, as long as the edge loops are in the same kind of places, so like your elbows where your elbows are on the other meshes, you'll still get something that's mostly that. Again, if it's dramatically different, you may have to rework some of it, but you probably won't have to rework all of it. Like I think it's still a better.
But
base.
It would accommodate for just reworking certain parts of it and just plugging that bit out and adding a custom bit for.
Are we talking the actual rig logic or the building of the skeleton?
Both, I guess. Like where does it? If
so
you was like, oh, this character is 90% standard, but has a broken arm, for example, would you then just be able to plop out, insert broken arm rig component, and then?
Yeah. So you can still like modularly like edit the graph if you need to, but like the rig logic should still be completely like that should work universally, because an IK is an IK regardless of whether it's on someone like that or if it's on something like a spider and stuff like that. Yeah, that should all be fine. The skeleton itself, again, it depends how you set up those procedural point generations, but. Yeah, I think you'll probably be fine. I think it will mostly work across the board. Again, depending on how you set it up. Right? I feel like that's such a cop-out answer. I'm sorry.
No, but thank you.
Oh, hi. I just had a quick question. At the beginning, you mentioned everything was USD based.
Yes.
How does Apex fit into all of these USD workflows? What was the data you got into USD at the end? Was it joints? Was it caches?
So so we just cached it out as geo at the end. So yeah, so that part is still just like an animation sublayer that we added over the top of our on top of our models. So yeah, like the actual Apex rig isn't ever in Solaris and isn't in USD yet. I hope it can be at some point. That'd be really cool. Yeah. But yeah, so we still just cached it out as like animation data.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Anyone else? Great. Well, great work, Sam. Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you very much.